Welcome to the Boswell Book Company Virtual Event Series. I'm Daniel Goldberg, proprietor. It is day 4,324 of us being in business, and we are honored to welcome Lauren Fox for the third time to Boswell, this time virtually. Her first time was at Harry W. Schwartz for her new novel, Send For Me, which is already winning acclaim and is the Today Show Read with Jenna Club selection, one of the two for February. Among its wonderful reviews are Malcolm Forbes in the Star Tribune, which called Send For Me an artfully constructed and richly absorbing novel that shows how love is strengthened, not weakened, over distance and time. Lauren Fox is also the author of Days of Awe, Still Life with Husband, and Friends Like Us. She earned her MFA from the University of Minnesota, and her work has appeared in numerous publications, including New York Times, Marie Claire, and Salon. We are very, very honored that tonight Lauren Fox will be in conversation with J Courtney Sullivan, author of numerous wonderful novels, including the most recent, Friends and Strangers. Thank you both for coming. We're so excited to be launching this. Everybody is virtually clapping right now.
Yay,
Thank you so much.
Lauren, I love your book. As you know, I emailed you at 2 a.m. the second I finished. I had tears streaming down my face, and I was just like, I have to be in contact with her immediately. It's such an incredible novel, and I'm so thrilled for you that it's finding its audience already. That is so fantastic.
Thanks.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm so thrilled to be here and honored and excited, and I'm so glad to be talking to you. I just am delighted to see you and talk to you, and thank you so much.
You too. I wish that we were doing it in person, but if we were, I wouldn't be wearing sweatpants. So there is a trade-off to everything.
Worth
but
it.
I have to say, I love Boswell books, and I love you. And I wish that I was there in person with you in Milwaukee. Weirdly, I just have to say, my friend Pam, who might be here tonight, who is a friend of Boswell books, gave my kids, she lives there, she gave my kids a book called Lulu and Rocky in Milwaukee when they were babies. And it's still one of their all-time favorite books. We read it almost every night. It's weirdly like one of those books that they're obsessed with. So to them, Milwaukee is Paris, London, and Rome all combined. So
it really is.
It is, right? So I told them that I was speaking to an author friend in Milwaukee tonight, and they were extremely impressed.
Yeah.
But anyway, we forgot to say before this, are you going to read, or are we just going to talk?
Well, yeah, I would like to read just a page.
Good.
Should I just go for it?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So I'm just gonna get started with the opening page of the book, and then we'll start talking. So this is the first page of Send For Me. It starts with a panic, a sound of sharp knocking, the pounding on Annalise's door, a crash in her skull, jolting her from sleep. They're coming. Her heart slams and she sits up, blind in the darkness. Her arms reach out. Where's the baby? Fear floods her lungs. She's drowning. They're coming. Breathe. Hold the baby close. Keep her quiet. Is there something else in the churning flood of terror? In the squeeze of panic, the slightest slackening, relief? She's been waiting so long for this moment, dread her constant companion, and now it's here. Whatever horror is about to befall her, she won't have to fear it any longer. In the room, silent now, she strains to hear. Her heart is pounding so hard, her body is thrumming, her hands trembling. Is that her husband next to her, snoring softly? Is that the warm, reassuring shape of him? They will take him too. They'll take all of it, everything and everyone she has ever loved, in an instant, a flash. Years will pass, a long, surprising slant of light, and this terror will abate. She will pick her daughter up from school, stand in her kitchen with her hands on her hips, sip from a glass in the evening, slip under smooth sheets. But this will always be her frozen moment, the definition of her days. They will always be pounding on the door in the middle of the night. They will always be coming.
So, okay, I have so many things I want to ask you, but I think let's begin with, I think sort of a common misconception maybe about novel writing is that an idea comes to you, and later that day you sit down and you write it. But more often, in my case anyway, something sort of percolates over many years, usually. There's the germ of an idea, but it might not be the moment for you, the writer, to tell that story right then and there. Um, it takes time to sort of develop that. And so this book has, I think, the most incredible origin story ever. And I'm wondering if you can tell us about that and why now was the time to finally tell this particular story.
Well, I wrote it in an afternoon. No, I'm just
Oh,
kidding.
good job.
I love it. I love it when people, I'm always it's so sweet when people say, I read your book in like, in one night. And I'm like, it took me 25 years to write, but thank you.
I know.
Um,
You're like, I can't figure to do it again. You're like, no, I just give me a minute. Yeah.
yeah, no, this story, I really have been sitting with this story for such a long time. It was my MFA thesis, a nonfiction, like a memoir version of this was my MFA thesis, like in the 1990s, but it didn't really work as memoir, and I've kind of held it with me for all those years. It is based on a true story. It's based on my family's story. So it's been in my heart and in my head for the better part of 2 decades. And it like the first germ of it took shape when I found in my parents' basement, shortly after my grandparents had died. They'd been living with us for a long time and their belongings were in our basement. And I found a stack of letters that my great-grandmother had written to my grandmother. My great-grandmother was in Germany in the late 1930s and early 40s trying to leave. And my grandmother and my mom had just managed to get out. So these letters, I managed to get them translated, and I knew that they were, as soon as I found them, even before I could I knew that they were special and kind of magical. I knew that they were going to unlock something for me. It took me a really long time to get them translated because they were written in this old-fashioned script that very few people can still read. I found someone at the University of Minnesota who took a personal interest in the story and kind of sat with me for once a week for about a year, and would read a couple of letters to me into a tape recorder. He would read them in English, and I would take them home and transcribe them. It was like sort of slowly getting to know my family history and kind of slowly getting to know my great-grandmother over the course of a year. And so I worked those letters into my master's thesis. But like I said, I tried to write it as a memoir. I was in my 20s and memoir just wasn't really my form. And then it was kind of exhausting to write. It's a difficult story. And when I was done, I put it aside for a long time, but it was with me, and it was always, I was always thinking about it and talking about it with my family. And a few years ago, when it came to light that families were being separated at the border, I realized that this story was newly relevant and that this was the moment to sort of turn back to it and try to amplify it. And it took a few people to say, you've written 3 novels, maybe this is a novel. Like it really was hard for me to envision it as a novel. I really felt like it had to be a memoir, or it had to be nonfiction, or it couldn't be anything. So it was like a very funny it sort of blew my mind to think that I could turn this into a novel. And that was the moment that I realized that it was time to come back to this story.
And you punctuate chapters in the story with snippets from the actual letters. Is that right?
Yes.
And they're very short. So how did you sort of decide to do it that way? And how did you decide which pieces of the letters to include?
They form the core of the story. I've been working with these letters for such a long time, reading them over and over again, like winnowing them down to sort of the nubs of like raw emotion. That every word of the letters in the book every word is true. I sort of made a promise to myself that I wouldn't change anything about the letters. Felt such an obligation to remain true to her words. So. But beyond that, I allowed myself to edit them and to curate them and to turn these like intense, grief-stricken, rambling letters into something more artful, to sort of thread through the novel and to pull the story together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I was reading it, I thought a lot about, I think historical novels that can tell us something about the way we live now are always really impressive and incredible. And this is one of them because it definitely made me think of families separated at the border. It made me think a lot about this sort of just rise, it seems, in anti-Semitism in this country,
Mm.
and also um, kind of just shades of what we've been going through with COVID, even in a way, this idea of, say, a grandmother who so adores her young granddaughter and is so used to being a daily part of her life, and then suddenly just cannot be with her.
Right.
And that sort of anguish that you capture is just incredible. I think one of the things I admired so much about this book is the structure is really interesting and really complex. And when a book is as well crafted as this one is, I guess it's sort of an occupational hazard where, like, I want to read it as just a reader, but I also want to take it apart like a clock so I can figure out how you did it. And since I have you here in front of many hundreds of people, I want to know, how did you do it? How did you decide on this particular balance of points of view, which is really kind of unique the way you've done it? And did you try it other ways and find that it didn't work, or did you just kind of know how to tell this story?
Kind of knew. I don't know. I'm imagining my writing group saying she did not know how to tell this story, but I feel like I kind of knew how to tell the story. Like as I was writing it, I felt like there were moments. I think this is what you're getting at. I sort of bounce between different perspectives, bounce among different perspectives. Like mostly I'm in Annalise's head, but then occasionally there'll be a snippet of the story that takes place that is from her husband's perspective or from just another perspective, and then it kind of comes back together. It just felt like there were so many voices in my head. There were so many voices that wanted to tell this story. And so I felt a sort of intuitive sense of when I needed to break away from the main character and just shine a different light and then kind of pull that back.
Yeah, it's really remarkable because I think generally when we have multiple narrators, you kind of see, like, okay, this one needs to have about 20 pages because that one just had 20 pages. But the balance is so refreshing, and it really sort of, for me, made perfect sense for this story. I'm curious because this is the first of your novels that's really historical, although your last novel was, I feel like, in some ways building up to this story. But I want to know about your research, because I know as a novelist, the first step is doing the research and getting it right. But you also have to then not fall too deeply in love with your research so that you're describing, like how a thimble was made in 1720 or something, like, because I know this, I'm going to put it in my book, and you just did such a perfect job in this book of putting us in a moment in time without going crazy with the research. And I feel like that is really, people don't know what a talent that is, because you, as the researcher and the writer, have to know so much more than you tell us, because you know what I mean? So how did you go about doing research for this particular book, and how did you kind of figure out how to do it with such a light hand, really?
I don't know that. Thank you. That's a lovely question. And of course there is that cut chapter about how to make a thimble.
I mean, I hope you'll publish that, because I've always wanted to know, honestly.
I read a bunch of books before I even started. I mean, I kind of want to hear what you have to say about this too, because so many of your novels are the same, I think it also helped that this is recent history. It wasn't so foreign to me that I felt like I had to dive so deeply and just know every single thing. I felt like, it is based on a personal story. I knew my grandparents really well. I didn't know them obviously in Germany, but I mean, so much of this I could draw from my own observations and my own memories. But I read a couple of books that were amazing. One was called From Dignity to Despair, about Germans, particularly German women in the late 1930s. I took a lot of information from that particular book, and I felt like I tried to have a light touch with it. I mean, thanks for saying that I succeeded. I tried to have, if there are things that I didn't. I mean, the internet is kind of an amazing thing. If I didn't know what one of my characters would have been wearing. I could just spend, an hour researching the fashions of the early 1940s. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what else I did. It was just, I actually found the research to be, I was so daunted before I started, and then I found it to be really liberating. It's like once you feel like, once something clicks and you really are immersed in the time period, it's just like, it gives you the confidence to really dive in and write the story when it's supposed to, to place it when it's supposed to be, when it's supposed to take place.
Yeah. Did you do your research and then write, or did you do them simultaneously?
Both, same. I did a bunch beforehand, and then I was researching as I was writing.
Yeah.
Do you do that?
I do, yeah. And I feel like there are some writers who are kind of threatened by research because they feel like it's going to limit them. But to me, it's the
Yes.
opposite.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, it totally leads always to story.
Yeah.
It's always giving me ideas for what could possibly happen.
I didn't think that I would, I thought this would be my one and only piece of historical fiction, but now I kind of feel like maybe there's more, because it was really fun. It's like such an intellectually satisfying endeavor.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, fun. It was about Germany, and like, it was about the rise of the Nazis. Not fun, but satisfying.
I know what you mean. Yeah, yeah. So something that kind of like blows my mind about fiction is like the fact that as a novelist, you have to make all these choices, right, to write your book, and no one else would ever write the book that you wrote. Like, you know what I mean? Because it's so much about what choice do I make here or there. And I think one of the biggest choices is, or the most important is, where does an author decide to begin her story? And so, you locate these characters to begin with just before their lives change. So we see them first as these really three-dimensional people who fall in love and get their hearts broken and harbor petty grievances against their family members. And it's so incredible the way that you do this, because, when we sort of begin to see how they're being treated, how they're being marginalized and shut out of their world that has always been the world they know, it's that much more sort of powerful and hideous to watch. And so I just wondered, did you know from the beginning that you wanted to sort of plant them there, before everything happens?
I can't remember what I knew from the beginning, but because I started so long ago. But yeah, like, I think one of the things that I've always thought about, that's always been at the forefront when I was working on this book, was the connection that the characters had to their physical environment, their connection to their surroundings, and their connection to just their physical things. So one of the things I wanted to do was build the world before it changed. And I just feel like, this definitely skipped a generation with me, but my grandma and my mom they really love, like, lovely, beautiful things. And I guess I don't really care that much myself, but I've paid a lot of attention to that, throughout my childhood and growing up. And it's a really beautiful way to exist in the world, with an appreciation for objects. And so I wanted to give my characters that world. And then I felt like, God, as I was doing it, it felt painful to me to know that was going to be taken away from them. So it felt like like I said, I don't know if I thought that way from the beginning, but it just felt like that's the right move, to sort of build this lovely world that they live in, and then show how it was taken from them.
I love how you use objects, objects that sort of outlive their owners and go on to tell a story, but not necessarily the complete story. Because that's probably so true to life. I'm very much like you, where my mother and grandmother have always loved beautiful things. And it's so funny. Last night, my kids, I don't know how they got it, but they came across this thing that was when my grandmother died, and everyone was kind of like splitting up her jewelry. The thing I really wanted from her jewelry box was a pencil sharpener that was a San Francisco trolley car. I just thought it was so cool. And I'm like, why did she have that? Did she go to San Francisco, or did someone else go and give it to her? And that was what I wanted. I didn't want the beautiful, expensive jewelry. I wanted the pencil sharpener. And last night, my kids found the pencil sharpener, and you would think it was my great grandmother's diamond ring. I was like, be careful with that pencil sharpener. It was my grandmother's. But there's something in this book. I don't think this is giving too much away, but where Claire loves the china, and just sees it as so beautiful, and her grandmother actually hated it.
Right.
It played a very different role in her life. I remember being told once that my great grandmother, one of her great grandkids, gave her a picture of Ireland, and she put it in a closet because she said, I don't want to be reminded of Ireland. She had come as a young girl and whatever. So that sort of idea, these tensions that can kind of rise up in a family between, say, like the way Claire sort of has this desire to excavate the past, and she's sort of far enough removed from it that it's really just quite fascinating to her. And there's this amazing moment where her mother tells her she doesn't really need to read these letters because she knows how the story ended.
Right.
And I think it's really interesting what you said in a personal note at the end of the book, saying children of immigrants are anthropologists of our own families. I think this also applies to writers generally. Like we're always just digging away at our own family histories and trying to sort of get at the heart of how did we come to be the way we are, and which parts of us are sort of just a reaction to the generations before us. But did you always have, even as like a kid, this sort of writerly sensibility of excavating?
I read, I think this was actually a criticism of one of my other books. Somebody said writers don't have any special insight. They're just really good observers. And I think that's actually, that's probably true for me. Just, we're just paying really close attention, and then like things are just lodging up here for later use. And yeah, so I don't know if I think I was always paying attention. I don't know if it always had in my mind to excavate, because the other thing about our families is that, you have to be a little bit removed from them to know what's unusual. You have to, it's sort of like, we're just lobsters swimming as the water gets hot. No, I don't mean that. Mom, Dad, I don't mean that. We're so accustomed to our family lives, and we're so, it's just what is normal. So I think you have to have a little distance. You have to pull away I at least had to just, be a little bit physically removed to take an interest in excavating the story. But, the details have always been accumulating. I've always been taking notes. When anybody asks me for writing advice, I'm just like, look up from your phones. I'm saying this for me as well. Look up from your phones, pay attention, take notes.
Yes. Yep. Yeah.
Steal your mom's San Francisco pencil sharpener, because
Totally.
that'll create conflict.
It's going to be worth a lot one day. So I don't want anything happen to that. Well, that makes me think of two separate things. So one of the things is kind of this idea that I think you just examine it in such a fascinating way in this book, but again with a very light hand, the notion of sort of inherited trauma from one generation to the next, which in recent years it's really been kind of understood in new ways, that this is like not just an idea, but something that actually can exist at the sort of cellular level in our DNA, and particularly events like the Holocaust, including the Holocaust. So I just wondered sort of if how much you had thought about that as you were writing.
I learned about that, that theory. What is it? Epigenetics? Is that what it's called? Mm-hmm. And it's fascinating to me. And it feels, I haven't read much about it, but it feels true, doesn't it? Like, it just feels like, that we inherit so much from our families that we don't even know about. But my family was so close and so loving growing up, and really wonderful and amazing. And I also felt like there were things I couldn't ask them. I couldn't ask my grandparents where they came from. And I don't know why. I've given it some thought, but I didn't know why when I was growing up. And there was a ton of like worry in my family, just a lot of like, just everybody's better off if we all kind of stay home and stay safe. And, that stuff just like percolated, and it feels like that is like a pragmatic inheritance, and it's also just rumbling below the surface.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay, I have a two-part question. So I want to talk to you about your absolutely incredible, beautiful way of writing about the mother-daughter bond, as you are a daughter and um, a mother of daughters. Um, you know, but also just doesn't even matter if you're a mother of daughters. You write so beautifully about that relationship, and I think it's when it's done well, it's one of the most interesting relationships to read about. And you certainly just like hit it out of the park in this book. So I guess it's kind of a like a two-parter question. But last year, when my last book was published, I did an interview thing with Emma Straub, and I was talking to her about how one of the great things about being a writer in particular is you meet these other writers who you really like as people, and you also really like their work. And luckily, we're not gymnasts, so it's not like we all peak at age 12 and then awkwardly have to look away from each other. We hopefully get better and better. And I think, with each book, you kind of like add to your toolkit of what you can do, or maybe you just feel emboldened or braver, to try more or to go further.
Yeah.
And I just feel like you've done that with this book. And I'm curious, like, what are the things that you feel like you sort of maybe didn't know how to do 4 books ago that you know how to do now, or you at least feel like confident doing, if that makes sense?
I know how to tell my children to go away and let me write.
Wow.
Right?
How do you
Like,
do that, Lauren?
love you. I don't know. I think every book I write, I think, well, that's it. I'm done.
Yeah.
And then I think, well, actually, there's a lot to be improved upon, and just whatever. Like, I feel like we can't stop writing, right? So we just have to hope that the next one is I don't know if I really have a specific answer, because it doesn't feel like I haven't like examined my writerly tools and thought like this is the one I need to hone and this is the one, but I just feel like you just keep doing this, like anything. It's that like 10,000 hours of practice, right? Like you just keep doing it and hopefully you keep getting better. And my back handsprings are to die for.
Show us one right now. Come on, Lauren. I feel like yeah, that is something that you don't know when you're starting out as a writer, that like it doesn't matter how many novels you've written, you will always be terrified when you begin writing a new novel, and you will always feel like I can't do this, because you're not like, oh, I've done it before, it's in the bag. Each novel feels impossible. And
Yeah.
I think if it didn't feel impossible to begin with, then you're probably not trying hard enough or something. It's probably not the right book. I don't know.
Or you feel like when you're writing one and you're really into it and it actually feels mostly okay. I mean, I am still thinking, oh, but the next one's going to suck, like the next one is just going to be impossible. So it's that like circling the drain of self-loathing that motivates us to keep going.
Yeah, I love that. Don't you love that aspect of being a writer?
It's really fun.
I'm wondering if we should. I feel really bad for you, because obviously no one likes you, because in the chat I just see, I love you, you're amazing. I love you, you're amazing.
I mean, I know everybody in the audience, so
you're sold out everywhere. You're incredible. So how embarrassing. You have no fans. But I know there's a lot of questions here too. So let me throw some of these out. This is from Judy Bernstein. How do you regard the characters as you wrote, as characters or as family members? And how did you manage this emotionally? What was the nature of how it felt?
That's a lovely, brilliant question. Thanks, Judy. Maybe both. I think because this story is so personal and is based on my family's story. I love the characters, truly love them, and also gave myself permission to create them out of whole cloth. I just, I couldn't dream. I think this was part of my struggle, having worked on this for so long and having first thought of it as a memoir. Part of my struggle was finally to allow myself to fictionalize these characters, because you can't get into anybody else's head, and it doesn't make, I couldn't I was really stymied by the impossible project of trying to know what my family members were thinking when all this was happening. So as much as they are based on family and the story is so close to my heart, turning them into fictional characters gave me like distance and perspective and a certain kind of closeness that allowed me to write this book. I think, does that answer the question? I regard these characters with so much love and affection, and my whole process was like the whole, the like cornerstone of a good novel is conflict, but my whole approach to conflict was so different in this novel because mostly the characters just love each other.
Yeah.
And the conflict is external.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you deal with, because you are a very you're a really funny person, and you seem to have a lovely family life, and I myself have struggled with this too, where I've written books where there's a lot of darkness in the story, and then the next book I write, I can't quite get that dark because it really does take a toll on you.
Yeah.
Like, where do you put that when you go, okay, now I'm done writing for the day and I'm going to go sit down to dinner with my family? Where does that stuff you've been putting into the book, like, how do you kind of close the door on it? Have you ever found a solution to that, or not really?
I mean, after I wrote my master's thesis, I remember saying to my husband, like, I'm going to go light this time and write a story about infidelity and betrayal. Like, it's, I think I do think just the pragmatics of, having a life that you need to live and having, a family and children or whatever your family looks like, just having those external obligations pulling you into a place that just can't be dark, like what you're working on. I mean, I don't know if I struggle too hard with pulling away from the darkness, because you don't want to spend all your time there. And then there, walk out of your office and see the demands that are like glorious and tedious and all those things, pulling you away. So
yeah. My mom,
I know that you know that, because I know that at 6:58, there were tiny people demanding your assistance before we started this conversation.
There was literally a 3-year-old in just Paw Patrol underwear on a skateboard under the table I'm currently sitting at, but he is not there now. What was I going to say? Oh, I was going to say, so my mother called me once, this was years ago, and she had heard Alice McDermott on NPR, and Alice McDermott is like a patron saint to my entire extended family. Like, their main critique of me is just like, can you please be more like Alice McDermott? Can you actually just be Alice McDermott? So my mom called me and said she had heard her on NPR, and I don't even know if this is actually true that Alice McDermott said this, but this is what how my mother heard it, at least, that she said you could either write an experience, you could fictionalize something that really happened, and that would kind of almost like free up this emotional space for you. Mm-hmm. Or you could not write about that thing, and it would always inform everything you wrote. Huh. Which I thought was really interesting. Whoa. I'm not sure, A, did she really even say that? B, if I agree, but I've always thought that it's quite interesting anyway.
Yeah, because it's either like, but that makes so much intuitive sense. It's either like you're writing about it and you've exorcised it, or it's just like you're obsessed with it.
Exactly. And I do think, it's funny you say obsessed, because I feel like the word, something I noticed, and in the rare occasions when I teach writing, I always talk about the word obsession, because it's something I noticed on many book tours and going to festivals and things like that. And my friend Ann Napolitano, who teaches writing, is a brilliant teacher, always talks about obsessions too. This notion that writers mention that word a lot. Like, I was obsessed. There's something about that. Like, what are you just obsessed with? That is the thing you should write about, especially if there's part of you that's like, don't write that. I can't write that. That would be terrible. Somehow that usually is the thing.
Yeah. So you either write about it or it informs everything that you write. So
yes,
Alice.
So here's, Okay, well, that's this question I just asked you, so great. Oh, I like this. There is a bakery at the center of the family. Did your family own a bakery in Germany, or are there bakers in your family stateside, and do you bake? And that's from Emily Fine.
Oh, hi, Emily. So my family owned a butcher shop, and my grandparents met I think my grandma either worked in the butcher shop, but I don't know if she worked in it or it was just her family owned it. And my grandpa was a cattle dealer. I have been a vegetarian my whole life and was like, okay, no, not writing about a butcher shop. It's just not going to be evocative for me. So it just seemed like a much better artistic choice to place the story in a bakery. My grandma was actually an accomplished and wonderful baker. So I have like really lovely fond memories of the German pastries that she would make. And I mean, I can still smell them, you know. My kids say that, you know, the reason none of my food turns out is because I'm always like, oh, that won't matter. Like I'm not really much of a cook or baker, but it's, you know, it's in my it's in my memories.
Right. It's interesting because you write baked goods really well. So
Well,
you don't need to
like
bake well.
pastries.
Too. You don't need to bake well because you write about baking well. So
They eat well.
Well, that's another thing we have in common, Lauren. My mom used to work in a deli in her 20s, and she has been a lifelong member of the Meat Cutters Union. She's very proud of this, even though she's gone on to a very different career.
Wow.
And she's card carrying, and I am a vegetarian as well. So just goes to show mothers and daughters.
I think there's some, like, I think there are butchers also on my dad's side of the family. I just feel like I'm atoning for a lot of meat.
Yes, same. So here's another question. How did or do you know when you're writing in the right direction? And it says being a writer versus performer with a director. That's from Judy.
Oh, how do you know when you're writing in the right direction? I think, you know, Courtney, don't you feel like there aren't many parts of my life where I'm doing something and I look up and it's 3 hours later. Like I feel like, you know, you're heading in the right direction when time has disappeared.
Yeah. Totally.
I don't know anything about performing or I can't make the comparison. I just can sort of like speak from that like creative moment where like, and you know, that still might be crap what I've produced in those 3 hours, but it's meaningful, you know. That's a clue that something's going right.
I think that's exactly right. And there's that just this kind of energy and this like, you know, excitement around the thing you're doing. I totally agree with you. It's the only thing you do where you just completely truly lose track of time.
Yeah.
And it's the best feeling. And I feel like getting to that part as a writer is extremely hard. You know, It's hard to get yourself like in the chair and not looking at Twitter. But when you can get yourself into that zone, it is the best feeling in the world. Mm-hmm. Especially if you're eating a baked good while you do it.
Exactly. But I think, I was going to say something about that. Yeah, I think I was just going to repeat what you said, that it, like the getting to that point though is difficult and tedious. And I mean, that's the hard work. Mm-hmm. That's me like walking around my house, like muttering to myself and swiffering, and you know, that's the unpleasant. I mean, I have very clean floors, but that's the unpleasant. It's not even unpleasant. It's just part of the process. And then the magic is that moment when like time disappears.
Yes. Someone asks, who plays Claire in the movie?
Who asked that question?
Andrew Kincaid, although it's signed Anne.
Wait, Andrew asked that question?
It says Anne.
Oh, Anne. That's you, Anne.
A question from Eleanor Brown. For both of us, what would you say all your novels have in common? Ooh, I like that. And how would you finish this sentence? I write books about.
Woof.
I hate when people are like, what are your books about? I'm like, oh, I don't know.
Did I email you earlier, or did I just think about emailing you earlier and saying I don't know what my book's about? I don't know. I don't know, Eleanor.
My favorite thing is when someone's like, "Would I have heard of you?" And then you're like, "Well," they go like you tell them the names of all of your books, and they're like, "Nope, nope,
Nope.
nope."
I skip that step. And if they say, would I've heard of you? I just say no.
That's good. But what do you think your novels have in common?
So one of the someone at our someone at Knopf said, oh, they were just talking about, I can't remember, talking about marketing or something, and said, oh, all your books have love stories in them. And I hadn't realized that.
Hmm,
And so, I mean, they are all kind of love stories in one way or another. What about yours? And would I have
that's
heard of
really
you?
true, Lauren, because and it's interesting because there's something about your books that really I feel like no other writer does. And you kind of just hit on what that is. It's like your characters, and you said it earlier too, like they love each other. We often find characters who do not, or do not belong together, or whatever it might be. But like, there's so much love in your books. It's really kind of amazing. um, oh, here we go. When anonymous attendee, definitely your relative, because they ask when writing about just kidding, when writing about family or drawing upon the stories of real people in your life, do you ask for their blessing? Do you give them a heads up, or how do you approach that conversation? Ooh, good question.
That's surprisingly easy one for me, because I've given it so much thought, and because everybody says, oh, is that person, is that character that person? So if I just let the people who are close to me read the novel when it's done, and they'll feel really bad if they want me to change anything. But I say, if there's really truly, if there's anything that you want me that feels too close, I've my people are more important than my work. But so I let my husband read, and my kids if they want to, and my parents, and so far so good. What do you do?
I do something really similar to that. I try to write um the early drafts, or not even just the early drafts, but up until almost the bitter end. I just try to write and not
Yeah.
censor myself, and not hold back. And then I do this thing where I print out the book and I try to like take really deep breaths and be very calm, which is not my way really naturally. And I just have a highlighter in hand and I calmly highlight anything that I think will get me in trouble or disowned or be upsetting to someone. And then I don't even do anything with it. I just highlight, and then I come back later when the whole thing is done, and I go through these highlighted sections and I try to decide, are there some, there are always are some that I can just completely get rid of.
Mhm.
There are many that I can change ever so slightly to protect the innocent. And then there are like two or three that I just can't give up. So I just kind of usually go for it. And I will sometimes, ask permission, but and I do the same thing you do. At a certain point, my husband reads it, my parents read it, and I'm not like, please send me all your changes. But I am like, if there's anything you really can't live with, let me know. And I
Yeah.
have to say, my family has been incredible about that. Like, I pray that my children will not be writers, but my parents are so proud and so generous in letting me write. And my dad told me very early on, because actually, my book, Maine, um, there was a plot line in that book that unbeknownst to me, was something that had happened in my own family. I did not know. And so I wrote this plot line, and people in my family were furious about it. The book hadn't come out yet, but they were furious that someone had told me this secret, and I actually didn't know. I had just sort of invented it. And so I remember having this long conversation with my dad, asking him, okay, I'll take it out, and what should I? And he said no, because as soon as you start doing that and censoring yourself, you're kind of doomed as a writer. So you just have to like go with it. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
I did change it though, but yeah. Okay. I feel like
I think just one more thing. If I think people are really see themselves in your work, and also, I mean, in my, like, people in my family have always had a smart and generous sense that this is fiction, so I feel lucky that way. But most people, like in my first book, there's a best friend, and like 6 of my friends were like, oh, that's me, right? And I was like, yep.
Really. That's the thing. It's funny, sometimes you don't think somebody will see themselves. You're not thinking about that person
Yeah.
at all, and they totally, are sure that it's them. And then there are other times when you're worried someone will see themselves, and they never do usually.
Right.
Um, Someone is asking, did your research? This is Dean Zamel. Did your research, writing of this book, and reading of your great grandmother's letters give you the desire to visit your family's hometown area in Germany?
Oh, yeah, that's such a good question. We did actually. My husband was teaching a few years ago through an exchange program through the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. They have an exchange program in Gießen, Germany. So we met him there, and we did visit. He did a bunch of like the preliminary research and got us like connected to the town's local sort of researcher, archivist. Like every little town has one. And so, yeah, we did visit. My mom, my grandmother, I think my mom was born there too. Is from a town called Langenlonsheim. So we got to really, and the family that we connected with was really lovely and generous, and walked us around and told us all the history. And they said that the daughter in the family said that it's like a long strip and of like the shape of the town is long and narrow, and she said they call it long and lonely because it's called Langenlonsheim. So yeah, that was a hard trip for me, and amazing. It was illuminating. My kids were little, and they were like, well, they were really little, and but I think it was even kind of an intense and meaningful trip for them too. Like especially my older daughter I just remember she was just wide-eyed the whole time.
Mm. Someone anonymous is asking if the names of any of the characters are names from your family tree.
No. That was one way I was able to distance myself from the characters. Naming, I love naming my characters. I feel like once I settle, do you find this to be true? Like once you settle on the right name, the character just like takes on dimension and shape.
Yeah, it's really, it's kind of a fascinating thing because you kind of tend to know their names. At least I feel like I just usually, sometimes there's a name where I'll like, maybe it should be this instead, but usually the names just sort of come and it feels like, of course, that's that person's name.
It takes me ages to name a character. I never know them. And then when I finally find the name, I'm like, oh, that's right.
Sting. Sometimes I actually, the book I'm writing now, I just realized that one character has 2 names. And I was like, which one will win? Because I wrote her at 2 different stages. Someone's asking, like, can you talk about your writing process? That's from Jill Morin.
I think I used to have a writing process, and COVID has disrupted it. And I just am like lucky when I have a couple hours. That's all. And I can sit down, and it's really hard to stop doom scrolling and tear myself away. I mean, I don't have much of a writing process anymore. I used to just have my writing process, which is when, it's really when you can steal the hours. So it was when my kids were really little, it was when they were sleeping or whatever. And then, recently it's just the hours that they're in school. But these days, I just feel lucky if I can get in my own head at all. So
yeah, I know. And I've actually felt very freed in just this very short amount of time since Biden took office, because prior to that, I really felt like as an American and as a writer, it was really actually my responsibility to be paying such close attention to the news and doom scrolling, frankly. Like you said, it just felt like it just feels weird to be watching an insurrection at the Capitol, on TV and say, well, I better turn this off so I can go write 1,000 words. Like, I can't do that.
Yes, I had the exact same thought during it. I was like, okay, well, that's this day gone. I mean, of course.
Yes,
Yeah, it's really, it's how I felt when Obama was president. Like, I can kind of sleep at night. I don't know. I mean, I know there's stuff that isn't like, obviously there's a bunch of stuff that isn't perfect and that we're not going to agree with, but like, at least there's someone with a heart and a brain. I'm sorry,
Yes, and you don't have to be terrified every second. And I think part of Trump's whole way of being is to constantly have everyone in a state of chaos
Yeah.
and a state of, so I don't know. I already feel like a little better as far as writing goes, that I feel
Yeah.
like I can safely look away. And that is this tension, I think, in this time we've been living in, that, I think that's actually okay, although not ideal. And then there's also the issue of just like balancing your life and your work, which anyone,
Yeah.
we all do, depending.
God, I just wish we were in the same room and I would just grab you right now. Like that's so, oh my God, it was so hard to be a writer for the last 4 years. I mean, whatever, it's not like coal mining, but it was hard.
Yes. Let's see. Was there
I'm not watching the comments.
was there a chapter or character or a part of the book that you found really difficult to write, and how did you work through it? That's a great question.
Yeah.
Good call.
What was the last thing you said?
Oh, and how did you work through that?
I wrote 2/3 of this book, and it was all the historical fiction part of the novel. And I was done, and I proudly handed it to our brilliant mutual editor and was like waiting. And she was like, "Oh, you're missing a third of the book." And that was the contemporary story. So of course, I knew immediately that she was very, very wrong, but I decided to give it a try. And that was the hardest part for me to write, even though, I mean, it was, in some ways it was the hardest part, in some ways it was the easiest, but I didn't want to, for some reason, I just didn't want to do it. And it just didn't feel, and she is wise and all knowing. So I knew she was onto something. So I embraced the challenge, and obviously, I'm glad I did, but that was, I don't know, I think I was still kind of hung up on not wanting this book to resemble memoir in any way. And the contemporary narrative is the closest to my own story. And so it was just hard for me to kind of recognize that that was what the book needed. And then once I was rolling with it, it was actually, sometimes I just went back in my old emails and was like, oh yeah, that happened.
I feel too like there's something like the book that I'm working on now. There's one part that I just know is going to be really hard. It's going to be harder than the rest to write. And so I'm just not writing it. Like, I feel like I need to have, for some reason in my head, I'm like, when I have 100 really solid, great pages, then I won't be afraid. And I'm just going to go for it and do that thing. And it's probably going to be really bad, but at least I'll know that I have all this other stuff too. There's something in my head that, like, one of the things I love about writing novels, they're so long. If you don't want to write a certain chapter today, don't do it. Go write another chapter.
Yeah.
So it's kind of freeing in that way.
Yeah. Completely. Yeah, I know that's hard I think that's, my first love was short stories, and then I switched over to novels after graduate school. And that is such a welcome part of the experience. Like, you can really just put it aside and come back to it when you're ready, when you've written the first brilliant 100 pages or whatever. Like, you can give yourself permission to let it simmer.
Totally. Okay, we probably only have time for like one or two more, but let's see. Do you use outlines for your novels?
Yeah.
You do. And so this says, or do you know the arc of your story when you begin, or do you just write and let the words take you where you go?
I outline pretty rigidly, and then that gives me permission to stray from the outline.
Do you always stray from the outline?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But at least I know I can come back, and I know it just gives me a sense of security.
Yeah.
Because if I don't, plot is hard for me. And if I just let the characters do what they're going to do, they're just going to take naps. So
I like that. Yeah. Someone is asking, Bridget Carlson is asking if this lockdown time that we are in has given you more freedom and permission to write, or has it made writing harder?
it's made it harder. It's really made it harder.
Yeah.
Because like writing and extreme anxiety and worry don't coexist well for me.
It's so true. I also think the only kind of silver lining of all of these things that we've been talking about the way it has been to be a writer in the last few years, I I don't know. There's but like, okay, this is so political and I probably shouldn't say this. And I don't
Hey.
know why I'm saying it at 8:58 or 7:58 your time.
Only
But
7:50.
but something happened to me when Hillary Clinton lost to Donald Trump where I just went, oh, like I'm an adult, but I'm just really getting this childlike sort of thing where, oh, life actually isn't fair. Like crazy stuff happens
Yeah.
for, no good reason. And there is actually something about that that's like kind of freeing. Like I just feel like it made me feel like, you know what? I'm just going to write what I want to write. And I don't care what anyone says because it's just the most ridiculous world. So what the hell? There's just no telling where we're headed. So just like write the story you have to write right now. I don't know.
Well, first of all, I think you're among friends here, so it's safe to say that. And second of all, I think however you come to that, like that, of course, you just have to write whatever the hell is, you're obsessed with or whatever. Like nobody, the next novel you write may not get published. No, you can't think that way.
That's right.
That's a horrible note to end on.
Well, I think, okay, the positive spin on that horrible note is that, I'm sure there are people watching who are writers at various stages of their writing careers. And I think the most important thing to always remember is like the tool you have, the thing you have that no one else has is your own voice. And when you start trying to sound like anybody other than yourself, you're doomed. And I think that might be, one of the things that connects all of your books. They're all really different. They all have really different levels of lightness and darkness, but they're just so undeniably you. And it feels like you don't have a hard time remembering that your voice is like your best asset as far as
you can't get away from it. That's the other, you're stuck with your own voice. So that's the other part of it.
That's true.
I just brought that one down too, didn't I? Too bad.
All right. Okay. Was there anything? Okay. Yeah. Daniel, should we just like stop now, do you think? Or I just pictured, oh, there he is. I picture Daniel like in a bubble bath in the next room and he's like, okay, I'm coming. But no.
I had to get my clothes on again before I did the video.
Like they're done. Okay.
Do either of you have any last words before I close things out?
I got no more words.
No more words. You've written them all.
Thank you, Courtney. You are just the best. This was amazing. Thank you.
Oh, you're the best. Such a pleasure. Such a pleasure. And I didn't have to put my kids to bed. So double thank you for that.
And nobody ran in naked. You are tied for the best. How's that? Another draw. Thank you both. Thank you everyone for coming. We would not have a virtual bookstore without you. Hope to see you at another event. And have a wonderful night, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.